What I heard was propaganda for a terrorist just now from Ben. The terrorist state of Israel, who's been occupying the
Who planned the attack and who supported the attack on October 7th?
Why don't you let them go?
Cenk Uygur went on Piers Morgan show, Piers Morgan Uncensored, to debate with a panel about the current mess that the United States is involved in the Middle East. The panel also included Matthew Syed, Jack Posobiec, and MAGA far-right winger Ben Ferguson. So we're going to take a look at this discussion with Cenk Uygur and the rest on Piers Morgan's show. I have thoughts that I want to share about this too. Let's get into it together.
Yeah, when Israeli officials speak, it's like they're in fantasy land. They leveled Gaza. And the reason that they leveled Gaza is because they're going to take Gaza. And that's not speculation anymore. When those of us who were opposed to their war crimes and genocide said they were going to take Gaza, that it had nothing to do with self-defense, it had to do with land acquisition, as all the wars that Israel starts has to do with. They said, oh, that's anti-Semitic. How dare you? Now their cabinet has said, yeah, we're going to take Gaza. It's a conquest. So now they've started another offensive war in Iran. They'll pretend to be the victims. That's what they always do. Oh, my God. So I had to start a war for self-defense. Nonsense. Garbage. Just like you said, 33 years. They even say any day now Iran's going to have nukes. It was a lie. Netanyahu went on Fox News over the weekend, admitted they weren't even close to having it within a year. Then they said, oh, it's because of ballistic missiles. The ambassador there again referred to the ballistic missiles. An incredible number of countries have ballistic missiles. Is Israel going to attack all of them? Is Israel going to invade all of them and then pretend that it's self-defense? And then they talk about, oh, we try so hard to not have civilian deaths, and then American media plays along. No, they killed hundreds of civilians in Tehran. So they always kill civilians. They always kill more civilians than their opponents while pretending that they care so much about civilians. They're the ones starting all the wars. We all have eyes and ears. We just saw them start this war. And every time American media plays along and pretends that there's a fantasy land where Israel's the victim, and oh my God, they just had to attack yet another Middle Eastern neighbor. They just had to take Gaza. So almost when you hear an Israeli official speaking, they're lying. They're lying almost 100% of the time.
I mean, I'm going to come to Ben Ferguson to respond. All I would say is, clearly, when you have the leader of Iran, the Ayatollah, who's gone on record as saying he wants to get rid of Israel, and when you have Hamas in Gaza, who are also wedded to getting rid of Israel, it's not completely irrational that they would feel that they are under threat. Now, you and I have debated a lot the way they've gone about things in Gaza. It's markedly different how they've gone about things in Iran and with Hezbollah. But I don't think we can pretend that Israel is not under threat from either Iran or Hamas. Ben Ferguson.
Yeah, what he just said omitted one massive aspect of the conversation. There was an attack on Israel. There was the kidnapping and the torturing and the raping and the murdering of innocent people that were gathering to have a fun weekend. The idea that he is forgetting what happened on October 7th and acting like Israel just woke up on a random Tuesday and decided to start attacking Gaza is absolute anti-Semitic insanity. We know what started this. And the second part of this, he says, hey, are they going to attack everybody in the world that has ballistic missiles? I lock my doors at my house every night for the people that might be right outside of my house. And you have someone that is saying, we want to annihilate you from the river to the sea and chants death to Israel and says they want to murder you because you are Jewish, and to act as if they don't have a right to defend themselves, and to attack Gaza after you have a massive terrorist network, an underground tunnel system that allows for them to go after you every single night, where you have to have an iron dome to protect and defend. So everything you just said, with all due respect, is absolute propaganda for the terrorists, because you admitted the fact that Israel was attacked first, that started the whole damn thing.
Okay.
No.
Matthew Syed.
No, that's not.
Hang on, Cenk.
What I heard was propaganda for a terrorist just now from Ben. The terrorist state of Israel, who's been occupying the
Who planned the attack and who supported the attack on October 7th?
Why don't you let them go? Why don't you let a foreign people go? How much do you want to oppress and humiliate and murder them? Now you're going to murder Iranians. And by the way, Ben, I think you forgot. You're an American, not an Israeli. Act like an American, not an Israeli. What are you, a foreign agent? Why are you working for a foreign government? Why don't you care about American interests?
I don't work for a foreign government.
We got no interest in this war.
Now, before we get into what Matthew Syed said, I wanted to touch on a couple of things here with Cenk Uygur and Ben Ferguson. So Ben Ferguson was shaking his head and rolling his eyes when Cenk Uygur brought up civilian deaths in Iran. This debate was recorded 4 days ago, so 4 days before I'm recording this reaction to it. And I just heard on the news today, and this was just the news, this wasn't some kind of opinion show or something, that they're saying already 70 women and children have been killed in Iran. So civilians are being killed, and any rational person doesn't want civilians to die on either side. But these guys like Ben Ferguson are only concerned about the civilians on one side. I have issues with Cenk Uygur with some of his other policy views and his opinions. But on this, I believe that he's spot on. And he has said over and over again how horrible the attack was on October 7th. Sane, rational, normal people don't want any civilians to die. And also, as Cenk Uygur brings up, this is not the United States war. And when he says to Ben Ferguson, are you an American or Israeli? I wish that every one of these commentators and every politician who calls anyone who, these are supposedly the free speech guys, but anyone who criticizes Israel, they say, oh, that's anti-Semitic, that's anti-Semitism. I wish they could be hooked up to some kind of electrodes to testify and say one word answer, where does your allegiance lie? Is it with the United States or is it with Israel? And they wouldn't be able to filibuster. They'd have to give one answer or the other, or they'd get shocked. I wish we could have that.
All right.
I have an interest in people being able to live a life without fear of bombs coming into their backyard, hitting their apartments, hitting their homes from a terrorist organization. Iran is a part of that,
Gaza,
and you know it.
And all of the Middle Eastern neighbors of Israel. They live in fear of Israel, the terrorist state attacking
Israel
them 24/7.
Doesn't go on the
all
offensive.
Israel
they
ever does is attack their neighbors and take their land.
All right. Time out.
The idea that Ben Ferguson throws out here that Israel doesn't go on the offensive is absolutely insane.
Why did you admit the I have one question about it. Cenk, I've known you for a long time. One question. Why did you admit in your opening statement that Israel was attacked on October the 7th? Why did you not mention it one time? Because that is the fact that you cannot bring up, because that is what started the catalyst of where we are today. You know it, so you didn't mention it because you want to indict Israel, acting like Israel woke up and decided to start attacking people. It's bullshit.
All right, listen, I do want to let the other two panelists come in. Cenk, you'll get a chance to come back.
58 years of brutal occupation, and you think it started on October 7th?
All right, let's not go back to the whole 75
years. Later, you're still murdering Palestinians? Still murdering Palestinian children for sport?
Gentlemen, there are four panelists, please.
So, okay, you love genocide, I got it.
There are four panelists, guys, there are four panelists. You can come back on in a second and have further thoughts. Matthew Syed, you wrote a great column at the weekend. And you were talking, and I thought it was very striking to me, about the difference between Vladimir Putin rattling his nuclear saber, because, as you pointed out, he's an extremely materialistic guy who's amassed hundreds of billions of illicit gains at the expense of his people. And he's the last person that would want to actually die for his country by pressing nuclear buttons, which would lead to his immediate vaporization. I've been saying that for ages. However, it is a different thing when it comes to Iran. There will be people there with very fundamentalist ideals who might think, if they're cornered, who might think if there's nothing else they think can get them through, who might think nothing of using a nuclear weapon if it came to it. And with the same kind of nihilistic attitude that we saw from Al-Qaeda, that we saw from ISIS and so on.
That's right. I mean, just a couple of quick points. Firstly, I like to think of myself as broadly pro-Israel, but I think, like you, feel that the destruction that has been visited upon Gaza is a moral, political and strategic calamity. when it comes to Iran, the reason I think that the logic of nuclear deterrence won't work is because they are, many of them in the regime, religious fanatics. They believe they have absolute truth. And the psychology of that is very interesting. It means that anyone who doesn't subscribe to their truth is an infidel and that they are wrong. And they glorify martyrdom and believe that if they can take down infidels, they will go through a door into paradise where they will be blessed forever. And I grew up in the 1980s. My father was born as a Shia Muslim, and I followed the Iran-Iraq war extremely closely. And viewers might be interested that the clerics, the fanatics who took over after the 79 revolution, indoctrinated young, innocent children that they were supposed to protect and asked them to walk and often run into minefields and blow themselves up. And they were then depicted in government propaganda as heroes, their limbs strewn across battlefields that many of us have now forgotten about. That, to me, is a death cult of great danger, not just to Israel, but to their own people. Because if they acquire a nuclear weapon and they visit one upon Israel, as they have claimed they would do, Ahmadinejad said Israel must be wiped from the pages of history. The supreme leader described it as a cancer. Call me old-fashioned, but I take these people's words. I take them at their word, if I can put it that way. But also a danger to the Iranian people who would die in a counterstrike. And by the way, my views of the regime in Iran are corroborated by 70% of the Iranian people, a fantastic people, an ancient civilization, most of whom have been immiserated by this regime that has also destabilized the wider region through proxies and Hamas and Hezbollah. And as you say, Hamas is genocidal too. So one can have, I think, an approach of saying, yeah, Israel have got things wrong. Of course they have. The person who was on before the ambassador doesn't seem to be able to admit that. But my goodness, when Israel goes after the regime in Tehran, not the Iranian people, the regime, I think all right-minded people should support it wholeheartedly.
Why is that absurd, Cenk?
Because here we go again with the neocons, just like they did with the Iraq war. We're going to liberate the Iranians by dropping a bomb on their heads. And once we murder them, they'll love us and they'll want to get rid of their regime. You can tell all these stories about the regime, and those are true. They're fundamentalists. They're not good guys at all. Saddam was not a good guy. That doesn't mean that we had to invade Iraq and cost ourselves several $1 trillion and over 50,000 Americans dead on behalf of Israel, who at the time called Iraq their number one enemy, and who had
that is not what's that is not what's happening.
So, and in this case, Iran did not attack Israel.
Oh, but
Israel attacked Iran. Stop lying. Stop lying. Israel attacked Iran.
Okay.
Iran did not attack Israel.
I am perfectly happy to say
Israel is the aggressor.
They did through their proxies, Piers. They did through their proxies.
Yeah,
Iran
I don't think they can be
on a daily basis.
I just think when anyone tries to defend
these guys and fund Hamas and Hezbollah. Think like you cannot be this dumb. I understand that you're a propagandist for the regime, but you and I both know
I understand you work
Iran
for Israel,
supports Hamas
but America
and
first didn't want
and
any
multiple
wars.
terrorist organizations. They have no funding without Iran.
When
they
I
don't
hear
have
you
the
guys
weaponry
describing
without Iran.
Israel's
they
enemies,
attack Israel every day. You know that. You're not that dumb. You're a smart guy.
Sure.
You're a propagandist, but you know that.
Sure. So when I hear you guys describing Israel's enemies, what you're actually doing is projection. You're describing Israel, attacking all of their neighbors,
Iran?
killing civilians,
Yes or no?
an aggressive military empire, interested in acquisition and wiping out their enemies.
All right.
You know who said from the river to the sea? Benjamin Netanyahu. Who's actually doing from the river to the sea? Benjamin Netanyahu. Who started all the wars? Benjamin Netanyahu. Get out, America, get out of this war. This has nothing to do with us. These guys work for Israel.
Okay, let me bring in Jack.
And the idea that the Iranian people want to be killed, the idea that the Iranian people want to be invaded and bombed is insanity. They do not want that.
No, but I do think a lot of people in Iran, I do think a lot of people in Iran would probably much prefer to have a different kind of ruler than they currently have, who operates such a draconian and repressive regime.
Yeah, they do not want Israeli rulers.
Okay, well, that's a different question. Let me come to Jack. You've been waiting very patiently. Jack, Cenk mentioned America first and how this is incongruous with America first. Well, at the moment, this appears to be an Israeli operation. They've started this war with Iran. Donald Trump appears to be taking a position of, we don't want to get involved here, making it clear this is not being done with America's obvious physical help. albeit I don't think he's too bothered about it happening, and probably quite pleased if it does destabilize Iran. But where does this all sit with Donald Trump's America First ideology? Should America, if it comes to it, I mean, if Iran suddenly attacks some American base, for example, should America get involved in this war?
Well, Piers, this is not America's war. This is a war that is confined to two parties in the Middle East. This is a war where the United States absolutely faces the threat of escalation. And as you mentioned, this mission creep and spilling over into the wider footprint of American military that exists throughout the Middle East. And I don't just mean Iraq and Syria. I mean all of the American bases, which are clearly within range of, you mentioned the proxies, you mentioned all these other forces out there. Of course, it strikes the danger of spilling over, not to mention the IRGC has the ability to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and imagine what that would do to global shipping and oil prices. By the way, they haven't done that. And 10 years ago today, Donald Trump comes down the golden escalator. And what did he say? No more foreign, endless wars. And instead, why don't we focus on the problems at home? He talked about, obviously, illegal aliens. He talked about deportations, but he said trillions of dollars spent in Iraq, trillions spent in Afghanistan. And what did it get for us? Nothing. Dead soldiers, wounded soldiers. We got absolutely nothing out. And you want to talk about destabilization? Well, I think those wars, the massive wars on terror, wars that, by the way, when I was in the United States military, I did participate in, at least in an intelligence capacity. But what did that do to the region? It destabilized it. Syria, completely destabilized right now. Iraq, completely destabilized. Yeah. And Afghanistan, the Taliban is even in a better position than they were before we got involved, because they have all the U.S. military equipment that we left there. And so every time the U.S. gets involved in one of these things, it actually seems to make the situation much, much worse.
So to me, Jack Posobiec is absolutely spot on when he says this is not the United States war. I agree with everything that he says there. And, you know, Donald Trump claiming to be the anti-war guy, we're going to see here. We're going to see over the next coming weeks. I don't buy it, but we'll see. I want to go back to something that Matthew Syed said about the Iranians, that they're fundamentalists, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but they believe that their views are the only correct views. They're religious zealots. Just this week, we had the United States Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, testifying before Congress. He said to a member of Congress, don't believe everything that you read in a book unless that book is the Bible. That's not a religious fundamentalist and a person who feels that his religion is the only true religion. And as we know, with most of Republicans and MAGA and people like Ben Ferguson, supporting Israel is not just a foreign policy position. They're supporting them based on their religious views. And so again, we have our own fundamentalists here who are banging the drum for war. And these guys like Ben Ferguson and Donald Trump and the members of Congress, any of these people who lead the drumbeat for war, vote for this war, support this war, their children should be the ones to go to Iran first. You know, it's easy to send other people's children to go and die or be maimed. But how would things change if we passed a law that every member of Congress and every president who decides to go into another war, a war with a country that didn't invade us, a war with a country that didn't attack us, and as Cenk Uygur says, this is not our war. As Jack Posobiec said, this is not our war. If there was a law that their children or their grandchildren or their spouse or their nephew or niece or whatever had to go and fight in the war, how many of these wars of choice would the United States be in? And Ben Ferguson talks about Cenk Uygur being a propagandist. I mean, what in the world is Ben Ferguson? But let me know what you think in the comments about all this. Do you agree with Ben Ferguson and Matthew Syed here? And Piers Morgan isn't saying a whole lot, but I would put him more in the Israel camp. Or do you agree with Cenk Uygur and Jack Posobiec that we should be sitting this one out? This is not the United States war. That's my viewpoint. Let me know in the comments what you think. Make sure to give me a like and subscribe. I'm Chris on Culture, and I will see you in the next video.